What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Path to Cross podcast. This is episode number 7 now, and joining me today is a man that has been on the show before. Not necessarily this one. He's been on one of my previous basketball shows, but it has been quite some time since that, and both of us have been able to have a relationship with God grow tremendously, and that's why it's an honor to be able to welcome on a man who is an NBA player. He's currently with the Toronto Raptors, and that is none other than David Roddy. David, I appreciate you for coming on today, man.
Appreciate you for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, as I just said, you came on. I looked back at it. It was about 3.5 months or 3 years and 3.5 years ago that you came on the show last time. Obviously, a lot of stuff's happened. Overall, if you could summarize, life over the past 3.5 years, how would you summarize that?
Man, that's a great question. I would say crazy first.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of life lessons learned, as well as a lot of fun.
All right. Well, if you were to look back at, when we talked back then, you're in the midst of your phenomenal final year at Colorado State. You're going on this incredible season. And obviously, I knew we talked about this. You had aspirations of the NBA that's now come true. You've experienced that. But would you say things have gone according to plan? Has it been up and down? Has it been better, worse? Or how would you kind of think that this past 3.5 years has been?
Yeah, I think this last 3.5 years has been a journey so far.
Right.
A lot of ups, a lot of downs. Started strong. Had a great rookie season. Just a lot of lessons learned there. Going to the playoffs for the first time, playing against idols, playing against people that I looked up to,
Right.
and then again just continuing to learn more about the business as years went on.
Mhm.
Got traded to Phoenix, and then bounced around from there. Again, I've had my time in a lot of great cities and a lot of great organizations and teams, but now landed in Toronto. So I'm just excited for the future. But man, it's been one heck of a journey so far.
I had Cole Swider on a couple of shows ago, and he actually brought you up in the midst of that interview, and he talked about that. You guys, going back to the beginning of last season, you guys had a conversation, and both you guys were kind of in this little journey situation, going through a bunch of different teams. And you talked about this. I heard his perspective on it, but now for yourself, obviously, it's probably not the ideal situation. You want to find a home, those type of things. But how has this experience now helped grow you as a person, but ultimately helped grow in your faith?
Yeah, these past 3.5 years has grown me into a young man. Again, it's just been such a trying time. It's been such a confusing time as well. There's a lot of times, through moving through teams, moving through cities, that you wonder if you're good enough, or if you kind of just think back of what all went wrong. But in reality, nothing went wrong. Again, God lays out the path for us, and the path that he lays out doesn't look like the path that we have. Most of the time when we lay out a path, it's a straight line to success. But,
Right.
again, mostly there's always going to be detours. There's always going to be U-turns and, everything of that nature. So, again, I remember the conversation that we had with Cole, and, we both kind of just supported each other, and we understood that, it's all part of his plan, and he's, growing us and molding us into the human beings that we need to be, as well as the athletes that we need to be, so that we can reach our final destination and, really kind of lay the groundwork and plant our roots somewhere. So, that's a, great question. And yeah, definitely, still support my guy, Cole.
All right, so that's an aspect that anybody can learn from, and it's even biblical in terms of we're going to have ups and downs. We know there's going to be trials, tribulations. We know things won't go according to plan, but we have to have that trust that, okay, at the end of the day, we are not all powerful. We can't control things, but we do know the one who can and who knows what's going to happen. As you go throughout this time, how have you learned to really embrace and trust in God that, okay, this is not necessarily my will. I want yours to be done. Just take me and lead me where you want me.
Yeah, I learned it through a lot of trials. Again, we read it all the time, and we hear it in sermons and on Sundays and Bible studies. But to actually walk through it and actually
Right.
go through it, it's just been such a great opportunity for me to learn. Again, it's very really tough. Sometimes to check your ego at the door and just continue to just remain humble and remain faithful. Again, and it takes time. Even the results that we want, we can't get those, in a 6-month period. Sometimes we can, get those over a 4-year span or a 7-year span, whatever that might be. So, really just staying present, and just remaining and, staying faithful. That's the biggest thing. Again, like I said, you literally have to walk through it, to get through it. You can't just stand still and, just continue to ask why me, or why is this happening to me. No, you have to work through it. So again, that's what's really kept me through, and has kept me going so far. And again, I've just learned so much, from that journey and from those hardships.
If I were to ask you the biggest thing that you've learned that God's helped kind of grow you in over this duration with all these different hardships, what would be the biggest lesson you've learned?
I would say the biggest lesson that I've learned is definitely just to learn to let go. Let
Mm,
go of the expectations, let go of the goal settings, let go of the numbers, and those types of things. Especially within my training, again, the first few years in the league, I was always looking at my stats. I was always looking at my percentages, or whatever the case may be in that sense. And it really enveloped me, and really got into a bad mental state because of it. I was putting way too much pressure on myself. Every time I touched the ball, every time I shot the ball, um, and those things really took a turn for the worse in a sense. Sometimes mentally I would shut down during games, and really just didn't have a lot of the right things put in place. For me mentally to have a healthy career.
mm,
And I think the last 2 years, we've been really working towards rechanging my mind, and reimagining the way that I see the game of basketball, and kind of just getting back to the joy of it. Again, spending time, in the G League, and with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers, when I was in Houston, really kickstarted that for me. Finding the joy again in it. Just letting my game develop, letting my game make mistakes, as well as learning through those mistakes. So
mhm.
there's just been so much thought process, so many thought processes through it, so many lessons learned. I can't be having this interview without shouting out Darren Treasure. He's my sports psychiatrist, sports therapist, in a way. And we've developed certain routines, and certain sayings, and certain things that will allow me to just stay present in the moment, whether that's on and off the court. And it's definitely changed my mentality, it's changed my mindset in the way that I approach the game, and as well as in the way I approach life. So he's definitely helped me with that.
I want to expand on the mental aspect because that is something biblically that is talked about regardless of where you're looking at. So many times with the Bible it talks about how important the mind is, guarding the mind, setting the mind on things above, on Jesus, so on and so forth. As you have now, experienced this firsthand, these ups and downs, even to a point, like you said, where you've almost lost some of the joy of basketball. How critical is it to maintain a strong mindset, both on and off the court?
It's huge. Again, to remain strong in the faith is the biggest thing, but again, just to walk through it, take it step by step, every day. I think that's the biggest thing. Again, there's a great book called The Inner Game of Tennis, that a lot of athletes read, and it just talks about the inner voice versus the outer voice, as well as your inner thoughts versus what you're playing. So, or your body that's actually playing the sport,
Mhm.
and really just quieting that, and just allowing your body to just trust yourself, allowing your body to just work through the repetitions that you've done thousands of times in your life, and just really just trusting yourself. And that's the biggest thing for me. That's definitely helped. But it's very important for an athlete to keep a strong mind, just because you don't want to burn out, you don't want to focus on the wrong things, and it can turn your career around the way that you don't want it to. So
Right.
it's very important for young athletes, as well as people who are trying to be a professional in whatever field that they want to have a strong mindset. To continue to sharpen the tools with your mind just as much as your body.
All right, so you talked about this aspect. You get to the NBA as a rookie, great rookie season with Memphis Grizzlies, and then obviously over time, going to Phoenix Suns, the Hawks, 76ers, Houston. Now you were Toronto. As you've gone from one experience to the other, has it become easier in a sense because you've had experience in terms of adapting to quick changes, these ups and downs? Has it become more difficult, or how have you kind of grown in these aspects as you've gone from one team to the other?
Yeah, it definitely gets easier logistically.
Right,
Mentally, it doesn't get easier.
makes sense.
But again, just going through it, and I've just looked at it as just living in different cities, and experiencing new cultures, experiencing different organizations.
Mm,
I have a lot under my umbrella in a sense of experiences. So that'll better prepare me for any type of situation that I'm in, whether that's in season or off season. So it's just been such a great time, just again learning and meeting new people. Again, being teammates with a bunch of Hall of Famers and a bunch of legends. I'm still living a dream. So it's just been such a great experience for me, and it's definitely helped me prepare for, again, the next time my number's called and the next time that I'll be planting my roots somewhere. So it's definitely very exciting to continue to have that knowledge. And I didn't understand how important it was for me to go through these things until after I'm on my sixth team. So when you're on your second one, you think you already know everything, but again, a lot can happen. So it's just been such a great experience, and I've learned so much as a human being that it's invaluable.
All right, this kind of will put you on the spot, but out of all the different states and cities, I should say, you've been in so far, which one's your favorite one?
For now, I will say Toronto Raptors. Absolutely, being in
All right.
Toronto has been great.
All right, I like that answer. All right, so in your Instagram bio, you have James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4, and it kind of piggybacks off of what we've been talking about, but I want to read it for those that are not familiar with it. It says this: Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. That's the one I said is in your Instagram bio. I have a feeling I know why it's probably in there, but explain why is that the verse you chose to put into your Instagram bio?
Yeah, it's a great verse. It's a great
Mhm.
verse to remind myself, again, when I'm going through trials and when I'm going through tough times, to count it all joy, and knowing that it actually works for your good. In the end, again, whether it's being traded, whether it's being cut, whether it's getting injured, all
Mhm.
of those things are going to help build you into the person and into the athlete that you want to be. So, reminding myself whenever I'm going through tough times, a shooting slump, or
Yeah.
something in life happens, you have to count it all joy, because it's all a part of the experience of life. And again, it's just been such a calming and homing verse that
Mhm.
again, I just continue to repeat it in my mind whenever I'm going through some tough times.
I'm curious as to whether or not this is something that kind of goes through your mind, but when we talk about life, as we talked about so many times already, there's so many ups and downs, and we know that you have to keep the eternal perspective. We know that we're only going to be on this earth for a finite amount of time, a limited amount of time, for however long that will be. And our main goal is to go to heaven. Our main goal is to have that eternal perspective and say, okay, whatever this time span I've got on earth is, God, use me to be a vessel, use me to grow me into the best version of myself I can possibly be. How have you been able to embrace that mindset, and has that provided any bit of peace for yourself as you've gone through these trials and tribulations?
Yeah, it's definitely brought me a lot of peace during this. Looking at it as not just being in the moment, which is very important, especially if you're a professional athlete, but also knowing the long game, especially just within my life. All of these experiences that I've accumulated over the last 3.5 years, maybe 7 to 10 years.
Mhm.
My story and my testimony can reach so many people, in a sense of people are going through the exact same thing that I'm going through, bouncing around teams, not knowing, what the future holds. Um, but also looking back on the times that, God has taken care of me, and all the stress and all the worry that I used to go through. It was all in his hands, and it was already taken care of.
Mhm.
So, that's just such a big thing for me. And the more that I experience more teams, and the more that I experience, the NBA as well, I know sometime down the line I'll be mentoring some young kids and mentoring somebody to,
Mhm.
for me to share my experience with them, just to help them through their process as well. So, it's very exciting for me to think about the future in that sense, because uh, I love trying to help people, reach their own potentials. And again, God has just blessed me with so many different skills that I'm very, very excited for the future.
There's always going to be countless blessings that God provides, and a lot of times we're not even going to see those blessings until in the future when we end up looking back on it. So, when you look back on this NBA career, this journey so far you've taken, what would you say is the biggest moment that there was a blessing that you probably didn't recognize at the moment, but now looking back at it, you see what he's trying to do in that moment?
Other than continually moving and being shifted, around the league, I think spending some time in Atlanta, in the beginning of the season, I was actually, at the end of the bench, end of the rotation, and there really wasn't any space for me to play. And some guys, again, the typical NBA story where some guys are injured, and your number's called
Right.
when you least expect it. That was, I think, the third game in OKC. I got put in the rotation, and I scored 10 quick points. And after that, after I scored that 10 quick points, my heel started to hurt more than anything I've ever felt in my life. And I could barely put my foot down. And again, it was plantar fasciitis. So, again, it was very painful. But I continued to keep playing and keep playing and keep playing. But it also helped me. It slowed me down. I couldn't explode as much. I couldn't, take off as much as I really wanted to,
Hmm.
or what I'm used to. But it actually slowed me down in the sense of now I can make more reads. Now I can, use my facilitative, skills, as well as learning better angles on defense and those types of things. So um, in the moment, I was very frustrated because I worked so hard to show that I've gotten better, and
Right.
then for that to happen, it was very frustrating in the moment. But once I got it healed up and went to Houston and other spots, that I realized how much of a valuable lesson it was for me to actually slow down on the court. Um,
Right.
but off the court, I mean, it's just been continuing to manage and move, and just to have time to really think about the priorities that are within my life, as well as how much I was connected to an outside source of whether it's validation from others, or whether it's validation from my job title or whatever that is. I had a lot of time to think about what really matters in life, and that's really just my relationship with Jesus and how I can share that with others, as well. So it's just been such a great last 2 years for me.
All right, so I want to expand on what you just talked about right there, and that is the priority list. Putting God number one will always be the best route. I think anybody that experiences life, you go through it, and there are a gazillion things you could place, whether that even be family, that could be money, that could be job, that could be whatever it is. It is so easy to slip up and say, okay, this is not number one priority. God, you're taking the back seat. I won't spend the next day or two with you, whatever it is. But things go wrong very often in that situation when those things do occur. For yourself, as you talked about, you've kind of realigned and said, okay, God's number one. Everything else will take in care of its proper order after that. What originally clicked for yourself and said, you know what, I need to realign, make sure my priorities are right?
Yeah, I think it was just in the midst of all the trouble or the
Mm,
storms, that people say.
right.
I think having real conversation with myself and accepting where I was at mentally, or where I was at, just kind of living in my life. Um, you have a choice. Either you dig in and you continue to let pride kind of rule your life, or you humble yourself and you turn back and you understand that, hey, I need to, change my ways. I need to understand that God is trying to transform me, from my heart, and then it'll exude out, in my actions. So,
Right.
I think that's really where you figure it out, as well as having just first of all having that real conversation with yourself, um, and wanting better for yourself, and knowing that you can't do it all on your own. I think that's the biggest thing, especially allowing God into your heart. He's going to transform you, in many ways that you never even thought that you could achieve.
Hmm.
And it's going to hurt. It's
Yes.
going to be tough. It's not going to be just this, hey, I give my life and now, you know, now what? So,
Right.
cleaning out those habits and those types of things and the way that people think. I think that's really what he's helped me with. And it's just been such a great and painfully great journey.
I love that you said that right there because, there is a mindset so many people believe that say, okay, I'm going to give my life to Jesus. Everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows. No issues are going to occur anymore. And unfortunately, I know it's not the most appealing recruiting pitch to somebody. That's not going to be the case. However, it's going to be for the better. I know it's very confusing for people that are not believers because you don't really experience that until you have to experience that to understand it. So I want to ask you that, you just talked about this. Yes, it's painful. Yes, he's going to refine you. Yes, he's going to change you. But what's going to come out of that is going to be a lot better, just talked about. So use your testimony, your story as to how you've actually experienced that those painful things do actually work out better and actually grows your relationship with Jesus.
Yeah. Again, I have many different, experiences with that.
Hmm.
The one that I mentioned beforehand with the injury.
Right.
I think all injuries are great times for whether you're an athlete or just a normal person getting injured on the job, and now you sit down for 2 weeks. Those times are times to reflect. I think that, you know, people don't spend enough time reflecting on certain things and having those hard conversations with a family member, having those hard conversations with a friend that might have done something, when you were younger. Those are perfect moments and times to reach out and talk to somebody. I think that's definitely a great experience. Um, Again, like I said earlier, just the bouncing around. I think that's the biggest thing that has been hard on me mentally, is just I know what I can do on the court, and sometimes that even mentally I was holding myself back from doing those things because of the bad habits or because of the way that I was thinking. Those things are the things that I definitely connect to, and for sure.
All right, so I want to go into the time when you get drafted because everybody in this world will have temptations. Everyone in this world will go through, temptations from the enemy in so many different facets. When you're an athlete, all those different temptations become a lot more accessible because you have money, you have fame, you have so many things, that be pride, that be women, that be whatever it is. As you got yourself into the NBA, were those things difficult? And if so, how did you kind of learn to kind of go through those situations and say, okay, I've got to make sure I'm putting my faith in Jesus. I got to make sure I'm not going down the ways that are so easy to access as an NBA player now.
Yeah, I think for that it's definitely just staying grounded. I think that's the biggest thing, and understanding who you are.
Right.
Again, nobody is perfect,
Mhm.
and it's definitely an adjustment for sure. But I think the biggest thing is definitely just to kind of remember who you are and remind yourself, that this is a platform to, share the gospel, as well as just, you know, do it the right way in that certain sense. So, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is just understanding and remembering that it's a platform and it's given to you, and be a good steward of it.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to go back now. I want people to get to know you a little bit better. And I know we talked about this in our previous interview that we had a couple years ago, but you're going through high school and you're a multi-sport athlete. You have multiple Division 1 offers from both football and as well as basketball, so on and so forth. But I want to ask about the faith aspect first for yourself. Was your relationship with Jesus always something that you kind of grew up in? Was it something that you eventually kind of branched off and said, okay, I'm going to give my life to Jesus and my entire life to him? Or how did your faith journey really start?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I grew up, in a Christian household.
Hmm.
My dad was a pastor,
Okay.
as well as just, I went to small private school, basically all the way up until high school. And I learned all the lessons. I learned, all the stories. I knew everything, from front to back, in the sense of, my education of the Bible.
Sure.
But I really didn't take it, you know, as, my own, relationship with him until I got into college. I think around my sophomore year, junior year, I really started to take it really seriously and understood, just the covering that he had on my life, and just the ways that he's blessed me, and has protected me throughout my life. I think that was the biggest thing that really propelled me forward in a certain sense. Not to say that my relationship with Jesus is because, is the reason why I was successful.
Sure. Yeah.
You can't pray your way into like the NBA finals, you know what I mean? Or like an
Right.
MVP. So,
Yep.
um, you know, I think that was the time where I really started to study on my own. I really started to research and really started to hunger and thirst after him. And, my life has changed ever since then. I mean, it's just been such an awesome experience to learn, and an awesome experience to just learn with others, about the gift that God has given us, as well as just to learn, more of how I can be a vessel, how I can be, somewhat of a platform for others.
All right, so that initial moment, and I know everybody's different. God works and kind of convicts people, I should say, and gets them really to give their life over to Jesus in so many different facets and ways. Myself personally was almost all at one moment, but I want to ask for yourself, was this something that was almost a progression, him kind of working in your heart to actually fully surrender? Did it happen at one moment? Or what led to that conversation where you said, okay, I really want to go all in on this?
Yeah, I think it was a progression for me.
Okay,
Again, I knew Jesus died on the cross for me when I was a young kid, but
right,
I think for me, actually understanding the magnitude of it is when you realize that you're making mistakes, or when you realize that you're not living in the spirit, the way that he says. So,
right.
I think it definitely was just a gradual build up, especially, when I started to mature into my young age, as well as just being in college. I think I've always been in Bible studies. I've always understood it, but also taking it as your own responsibility in a sense.
Mhm.
Um, and really just kind of taking it serious. That really took me, until sophomore year, junior year of college. And uh, yeah, I think just the more I understood and the more I was around the word, the more curious I got, as well as the more retrospective I was in a sense of knowing how blessed I am and knowing how amazing God's grace is.
Mhm.
That's what really kind of kickstarted my journey.
All right, so many people out there, they're going to go through life and they'll know and understand the word of God, but they won't necessarily experience that relationship. And there is a big difference there. And we can go back and say this. There are many people of the Islamic faith, there's many people of different faiths that know the Bible because of for different reasons, be able to prove people wrong, whatever it might be. But there's something special when you do take that personal relationship with Jesus, when you actually experience and say, okay, this isn't just something I know or maybe even believe in, but I'm actually going to be, pick up my cross, I'm going to follow him daily. As you've now grown in this, how much has that relational aspect really changed you as a person in your life?
Yeah, it definitely has changed a lot of things in my life, from everyday decisions to
Mhm.
the way that I react to certain situations. In many different ways. Be slow to anger. I think that's the biggest thing. I think I got a little bit of a temper, so that's a little bit of the football in me. Still in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just I think the biggest thing for me is just my patience. Growing
Mm.
up, I definitely had a short temper. Um, but also, I think the trust part and having the faith part, I think that's the biggest thing, because worry is not a healthy thing for us to do.
Yep.
And all over the Bible, it says to worry not. So I think God has definitely brought me through situations where something that didn't go my way, I would continue to overthink about it, and it would literally have bodily effects on me where I would start to get sick or my joints would start to hurt or whatever it might be. And then the thing that I was so worried about was already taken care of,
Mhm.
prior to. So um, after that experience, I would always continue to tell myself, why did I just worry so much about it? You know what I mean? So I think
Right.
having that confidence, and just having that ultimate faith, is something that, he's definitely just kind of brushed me through a little bit. So as long as I continue to have faith and continue to work hard in what I'm doing, whatever that might be, and just staying in the moment, that's where real joy comes in. So it's just been awesome.
All right, you talk about the anger aspect, and I feel like for so many different people, when that relational thing happens, you're gonna start getting convicted of a lot of things. And I know for some people, at least for myself personally, it was one major thing, and then all of a sudden, I keep peeling back. It's like, okay, I got to improve on this thing and this and the third. And I guess, and honestly, over all the way even to today, and my rest of my life, there's always gonna be things to get better at. But as you started peeling back and changing this aspect of your life, this aspect of your life, were there any things that were super difficult for yourself, where you kind of were like resting with God a little bit and saying, okay, I don't want to give this portion up. I want to try keeping this.
I wouldn't. I'm not sure. I think probably the anger and the worry, the overthinking part,
Okay.
especially just within my professional life. Again, this job that we do is extremely difficult and is
Mhm.
extremely taxing on the mind. Um, and then you see some guys that they actually care less. If that's it, I know it sounds bad, but they
Yeah.
actually do care less about their performance, and they do care less about what other people perceive them to be,
Mhm.
and they play better, and they're probably one of the best players in the world.
Right.
I think that's the biggest tussle for me, is because sometimes the overthinking or the worry can almost be sometimes performative, and at the end of the day, for me, what I've learned is the less that you care about whether this shot goes in, whether you win or lose a game. Of course, you always want to win a game,
Right.
but you can't connect that to your own identity or your own self esteem, because
Mhm.
that's a very slippery slope and it can be really dangerous to the mind. So, I think overall for me, I think that's the overthinking part. I'm a very cerebral person anyway,
Mhm.
so especially when it comes to sports, but trying to dim that down a little bit and uh, just continue to trust yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, and trust in the Lord. That's the biggest thing that you know I've definitely learned.
So many people might listen to what you just said about identity and they'll say, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? I hear Christians throw that word around all the time. They say this, they explain that, but what does it mean? I want to ask you in this position, what is your identity, and then what does that exactly mean to you?
Yeah, my identity is who I am. Whether that's my identity in the sense of how others see me, and
Mhm.
then how I see myself as well, and just who I am as a person. When I say connecting the stats to my identity or the outcomes to my identity, it's such a slippery slope because if you shoot well, you feel like you're a better human being. If you don't shoot well, you feel like you're less of a human being. But
Mhm.
in reality, you shouldn't have that connected to you or your self esteem at all. You should have the foundation of Jesus Christ and how much He loves you and how He sacrificed His life for you. That's what you should base your foundation on.
Mhm.
Having the firm foundation. Um, I think that's the biggest thing, and that's what I see when I talk about identity.
All right, so we're going to head now into your college recruiting process because that was quite interesting for yourself. I know we talked about that a little bit back then, but I don't think we dived into the faith aspect as much. But you had quite the position. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you had an opportunity to go football. You could have gone basketball. Obviously, you were track as well. That was something you did participated in, and were very successful at high school as well. When you're going through this process, that's a lot of decisions. Do I what school am I going to choose? But even another conversation you probably had that most people don't is what sport do I even choose? Obviously, we know what happened. It worked out phenomenally. But when you go back to the decision, how did you make it? Why did you choose basketball? Why did you choose Colorado State?
Yeah, that's a I could write a book on that. It definitely was an interesting and such a great experience for me.
Mhm.
Especially, being 17, 18 years old. I think that was the first adult decision that I've made.
Right.
For me, it was really between basketball and football.
Mhm.
Track recruitment really wasn't a thing. But I knew when I was going into high school, I knew I was going to have to decide one day, which sport I was going to choose. But I tried to push that decision off as much as I could. So, um, when the AAU basketball started to show up and the offers, when my sophomore year started to show up, that's when the traction really got to start rolling. Um, but for me, it was definitely just based off of the relationships that I had with the coaches.
Mhm.
Again, I had more basketball offers than I did football, and I was going to entertain, every coach that reached out to me. Again, I never thought that coaches were actually going to reach out to me ever when I was a kid. So, um, again, it was such an interesting time because in basketball, there's less players, so they're recruiting you, and it feels more intimate, as well as it just feels more, they pay more attention to you than it does football. Sometimes
Definitely.
they recruit hundreds of kids a season. So for me, I really just didn't get a good connection with any of the football coaches, as well as some of them wanted me to play a different position than I was in high school. So they would want me to be a defensive lineman or a tight end, which is fair. I'm a 6'5" athlete. So, it was definitely a tough position in that sense, but I just got a better feel for basketball.
Oh.
And then choosing Colorado State, that was one of the best decisions I made in my career. Absolutely. Again, back to the overthinking part. I was writing pros and cons lists for every school. I was writing literally everything down that I could think of, making hypothetical situations in my head. Like, that was the most thought out decision I've ever made in my life.
Right.
And the biggest thing for that was understanding and really having faith. And I knew that I was going to choose Colorado State about 2 weeks before I even committed. And it was just a gut feeling. And sometimes the spirit kind of just gives you a little nugget, and
Mhm.
you start to find type of you know every single note of why it's not the right decision. And I was fighting with myself for 2 weeks, and literally I woke up one day. I'm like, no, this is it. This is the reason, and this is the clear
Mhm.
cut decision, to go to Colorado State. So, as a kid, you work towards, going to the Big Ten. From Minnesota, so living in the Big Ten country, it's the Golden Gophers. It's
Yeah.
Michigan State, it's Wisconsin, Iowa, all those schools, and then there's Colorado State in the Mountain West, and you're just like, I've never heard of this school before. But going on the visit there with Coach Medved and Coach Thorson, who are also both from Minnesota,
Hmm.
they recruited me night and day. They recruited me 24/7. So uh, just for them to instill that trust in me and instill that belief in me of, hey, I can come here and make an impact. I can change, a program around. Me, Isaiah Stevens, John Tonje, Deshaun Thomas, and
Hmm.
James Morris. That's a pretty good class.
Yeah.
Three of us are now in the NBA. So, it's just been such a great experience. But for me to go there was like the hardest decision for sure. Just even telling my parents, it's like, hey, I'm going to go to Colorado State, and they believed in me as well. They wanted to go to Colorado State too, but having that fear in a sense as a young kid about the outside view of, hey, he didn't go to Minnesota, hey, he didn't go to the Big Ten. That was there for a little bit, but
Hmm.
just the excitement, you know, just washed over all of that. So
Now, this isn't a faith-based question, but I do have to ask your thoughts on this. I feel like Minnesota finally did get it right with their head coaching job. I've been saying for so many years it had to be either Dutcher from San Diego State or get Medved from Colorado State. I feel like both those guys could have got Minnesota back on track. They did not want to make those choices for X amount of years, for I do not know why. They finally did get your former coach now, Nico Medved. How excited are you for that? And do you think he's finally going to be the guy to get Minnesota basketball back?
man, I couldn't be happier for Coach Medved.
Hmm.
Again, this is his dream job. This is where he wants to be.
Yep.
We spent great years together at Colorado State, and he's changed that program and transformed it into again such a powerhouse.
Yes.
In the Pac-12 now. Again, and Coach Ali Farouk is going to again take that and run with it. So
Yep.
I'm just super excited for Coach Medved to be back in the Big Ten, back coaching at his dream school. And I know that he's the right guy for it. He builds his teams around the right fit, the right culture, high character young men, and unselfish young men on the court. I think that's the biggest thing that makes his teams so different from others as well. Everyone hangs out with each other. There's no egos.
Mhm.
It's just been such a pleasure to watch, especially after I left. Just to take Colorado State to new heights, higher than when we even got there. So
Yep.
again, I'm just super excited for him to just be back in that maroon and gold.
All right, now this is going to put you on a little bit on the spot here, but I know you're from Minnesota. I'm assuming you were a Gophers fan growing up. If Minnesota with Coach Medved now at the helm is playing Colorado State, who you rolling with?
I gotta go with the team that I played for. I gotta go with Colorado State. I
All
bleed green and gold. So
right, love it. All right, so I want to get back into the decision process because there's a crazy thing that people are going to learn that every answer for every decision you have to make in life is not written in the Bible. That's a kind of a wide awakening there, but obviously the Bible does not say David Roddy, you're going to be going to Colorado State. And we have to use that kind of take a wisdom and advice from the Word of God, and then use discernment from the Spirit and kind of see where that leads us and guide us to make decisions. It's not always easy to do that though. As you were going through that process now, and you look back on it, how did you kind of like you talked about a little bit of a nudge? How did you really kind of identify that is the Holy Spirit, and now utilize that in decisions moving forward?
yeah, I think it's really just quieting down your mind. I think that's the biggest thing. Again, like I said, I'm an overthinker. This is like the fifth time I mentioned it.
Right.
Um, again, and most of the time, it's not the thing that you want, or it's not the decision that you would usually go down. In a sense,
Yep.
there have been many times where you're in public, whether you're on the plane or you're, in the airport, and you just feel something telling you to have a conversation with this person or have pay for this person's meal or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And that conversation turns into them sharing their faith or their testimony or their hardship that they're going through. And you sharing your testimony or you sharing the uplifting message that the Holy Spirit sent you there to do in the first place, or that put
Mhm.
that feeling on you in the first place. Um, you know that if you meet a new person and sometimes we're having conversations and all of a sudden Jesus gets mentioned in a conversation, like your face lights up or your
Yep.
spirit lights up. It's like, oh, like you know Like, hey, let's have this conversation. And you just turn out that it's like such an amazing connection. And
Hmm.
just, that's just how the Holy Spirit works. So, I think that's for me, that's really how I try to listen,
Hmm.
um, and be obedient to it, because sometimes, you know, the nervousness and the nerves are still there, and the fear is still there of
Right.
making yourself look like a fool. But, again, sometimes you got to be obedient, and sometimes you might look like a fool. But it's not for you; it's for somebody else. It's planting a
Mhm.
seed. So,
Yep.
planting a seed and walking away, being okay with that. You might
Mhm.
never see the fruition of. You might have changed somebody's life through the Holy Spirit, and you might never see it off
Mhm.
of paying for somebody's meal, off of saying, "Hey, I'm praying for you," or whatever the case may be.
Right.
God works in mysterious ways, as many people always say. But I think that's the biggest thing is understanding that planting a seed and walking away is usually what's going to happen.
All right, so that's obviously something that you kind of develop overall in your Christian faith and your walking journey with Jesus. When would you say you really started to become comfortable? It's still always a little bit uncomfortable, but when did you really start to feel like, okay, I'm surrendered enough to Jesus where I'll trust Him. I'll go do these crazy actions. At least it seems crazy in my back of my mind, but I'm gonna go forth and do it.
Yeah, I think during pre-draft, I think that was the biggest time for sure. Again, like I said, I was very worrisome just within where I was going to get drafted. Was I going to be undrafted? And traveling all around, doing workouts city to city, 3 to 4 workouts a week. And you're in a lot of airports at that time, and you meet a
Hmm.
lot of new people, and you meet a lot of interesting people. So, um, I think for me, that was the real time, um, where I was by myself. I was mostly present in every moment, and those moments were great experiences for me. Just having a conversation with the janitor, having conversations with the person sitting next to me, or the waitress, or whoever it might have been. Those were great builders for me. For the future.
I love that. All right, so let's go into Colorado State because you talked about this a little bit earlier, and that was, around your second year in college, whatever it might be, is really when you started taking your faith seriously. And then you said it kind of changed you, and all these different aspects happened. So walk us through that. The David Roddy in the beginning of your college career compared to David Roddy senior year. What were the differences?
I think for me, you know, early on within my college career, or just in life, in general, sometimes we see Jesus as like a wallpaper, in a sense of like, we know what to say when someone asks us about Jesus,
Hmm.
but we don't really understand what it really takes, in a sense.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, of Luke 9:23 is take your cross and
Hmm.
follow me. Pick up your cross and follow me.
Yep.
Um, you know, Understanding what that meant. That's what happened in college, basically, of like seeing the cross and knowing that it's a symbol, but also picking it up and walking with
Hmm.
it. That's what the change was from younger me to sophomore, junior year of me, and continuing to this day. We all have struggles to this day. So,
Yep.
I think that's the biggest change for me, is just the decisions that you make, and the conviction, and all of those things now happen, and understanding, putting things in the way of those, or making those decisions, or you know all of that has uh, began to start while I was a junior in college.
All right, so another thing I want to ask you about is in terms of a locker room presence. Obviously, we look at Colorado State. You're the guy, you're the leader, all these different things. It's probably a little bit easier to speak up about your faith, whatever it might be, as opposed to you're a rookie in the NBA. You got guys that are NBA All Stars, Hall of Famers, so on and so forth. And that's the same case for all the different teams you've been a part of. As you kind of go through these experiences, starting with Colorado State, how are you the light in the locker room? Because obviously, God even talked about, our job is not necessarily to force people to faith. We cannot do that, but it's still being a light, planting seeds, and each person does that differently. So how did you really start to do that when you were at Colorado State?
Yeah, it's a great question. In Colorado State, I was in a more of a leadership role. So,
Yeah.
it was me, Isaiah, John Tonje as well, Deshaun Thomas. We were all mostly upperclassmen.
Hmm.
But even when we were freshmen, Nico Carvacho, he was our mentor, our big brother. And he introduced us to the team pastor, the team chaplain, Pastor Square. During COVID in my sophomore year, we started to have Bible studies, um, team Bible studies. Just it was just with the four guys that were in our house, and it blossomed into 8, 9, 10 people. Coming my junior year. So shout out David Wacker. He used to play at Boise. Now he's a team pastor at Grand Canyon University now. So he led those Bible studies, and it just continued to grow. In the NBA, it's a little bit different. I can't just go into the locker room and start preaching to people, but just there's a lot of downtime, right? So we're traveling with each other all the time, and we're just having conversations. And I think just on those plane rides, and again, the Holy Spirit just fills in the cracks basically of our conversations, sometimes, and he'll give us a little nugget to, for us to share our testimonies, whether it's the things that we're going through right now or the things that happened to us back then or in the past. So, there are many different, ways in the sense of showing and being a vessel, for the Holy
Right.
Spirit. I think the biggest thing is showing up every day with a smile on your face and just with the joy that God gives.
Mhm.
I think that's the biggest thing. Again, you can't be a inconsistent guy, energy wise as well. But just having that joy, I think that's the biggest thing. Is when you have someone, or when you meet somebody that truly loves Christ, and you sometimes ask like, "Hey, what's different about this guy?"
Yes.
And that curiosity starts to become a stepping stone into having full blown conversations about Jesus and just how much He's blessed me within this life. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just showing up every day with that joy, and then having just normal conversations.
How well is it received in the NBA from both the, at large, whether that be management, ownership, whatever it might be, in terms of embracing someone that has faith like yourself, but also within a locker room? Like you said, you're not going to go out there and just preach right out the gate, but those conversations, chaplains, those different type of situations. How well is faith received within the NBA?
I think it's received well. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think, again, we have team chapel, at every arena, 60 minutes before the game. So, again, it's very common. There are a lot of people in the NBA who follow Christ. And, again, there's such a brotherhood, of us in the NBA that, you're always going to feel supported,
Mhm.
whether it's by your own team chaplain or whether it's by a certain team's, team chaplain. You might have a better relationship with somebody in Atlanta than you do at your home one, or you're just trying to figure it out. So there's just such a great web of connections that you know it will really help you. When you reach out and you start networking. So yeah, the NBA does a great job with that.
Has there been one locker room more so than the other that you've really experienced and felt like there was a strong presence of the Holy Spirit just really working within that team?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's pretty even.
Okay.
Again, each locker room is different,
Sure.
with certain people or certain warm up times and everything. But yeah, I mean, just God works with everyone in His own unique way. So yeah, they're all unique in their own way.
All right, in terms of those chapel experiences, I know I've talked about Isaac Jones. He's been on the show, Cole Swider, the different guys. When you talk about that, it has to be a unique experience. You get to go out there and you get to find your fellow brothers in Christ, get to create some type of fellowship relationships. How big has that been in your career to be able to kind of find those guys that you really share something that's your most important trait, that you're most proud of, that you really want to embrace the most, and find those common traits with other guys in the NBA?
Yeah, it's very important. Again, you go through cities, and we know who's going to be in chapel by the third fourth time that we play them. So
Right.
sometimes we check in on each other during warm-ups, or check in on each other after the game, and that can spur it into something bigger. Sometimes you're with a guy in chapel, you see him 3 4 times a year, and he turns out to be your teammate. And
Mhm.
that's again another great stepping stone into building that relationship and building that brotherhood and that foundation of um, just being in the body of Christ. I think that's the biggest thing. So having those great connections, that's where it starts. It could be coaches as well, and
Okay.
staff members, strength coaches and everybody. So over my time in my many teams, I've had many different connections through chapel and just through Christ.
I love that. Now, there's a couple things I want to ask you before I let you go. One of which is this: there was a very unique story for those of you that have followed just in Colorado State. I'm one of those people. Obviously, I know that there was a very awesome story with Kimberly, and you guys got an opportunity to reunite earlier this year. I think it was the very beginning of the like January 2nd or something along
Mhm.
those lines. I want to ask about that because you talk about being the light, you talk about planting seeds, all the different aspects. That's one of those that really kind of came to fruition that I have to imagine for yourself. So elaborate on that. Just how special was that opportunity to go reunite with her?
Yeah, it was such a great opportunity. Kimberly and her family have just been such a great support system for me. Ever since I met her my freshman year, going into year four now in the NBA.
Mhm.
She's just such an awesome woman, and she's just such an awesome person to be around. Again, for that experience, it just really just hit home. Understanding that I had a last name on the back of my jersey my freshman year and scoring a career high for her, that was pretty nice. So,
Mhm.
just to be a cancer survivor and continuing to just show up every day with a smile on her face and just have just such a beam of joy.
Mhm.
Again, it's just such an awesome reminder of just how blessed we are and how good God is. So, again, I always support her and I always wish her the best. So, yeah, it's great to hear from her at all times. So she's awesome.
I love that. Well, David, I've got one final question for you. Every interview, I always wrap up with the same question. That's talking about your legacy. When the day does come and you put down the ball, you retire from the game, whatever it is, and God says, "All right, you're done doing this for at least this point in your life." What do you want your legacy to be for what you have brought and accomplished both on the court as well as off of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really want my legacy to really just be a pillar for other athletes to lean on in a sense. Whether that's mentorship, whether that's just being such a great teammate. Just to be remembered as a guy that showed up every day and gave it his all, as well as trying to be the person that people whether it's I really not too worried about the stats or the statistics or whatever, but just understanding that I try to help as many people as possible. I think that's the biggest thing is just try to impact their daily lives through Christ. I think that's the biggest goal for me, and it's something that brings me joy and brings me excitement every time I think about it. And it's just been such a great opportunity so far to learn from my experiences and share my experiences with others who may be going through the same thing.
Mhm.
And again, I find so much joy in that. So hopefully that will continue for many, many, many years. But if not, then going on to the next chapter. But for me, my legacy is definitely just to impact people, through Christ as well as just mentoring them.
I love that. I do have to piggyback off that real quickly. Post basketball, I know obviously you don't know what God's got in store for you, but is there an avenue of life that would intrigue you? I know you just talked about obviously mentorship, those different types of things. Have you ever thought like, okay, do I want to become a sports chaplain, something along those lines? Has that ever intrigued you? And what, if so, what would be some of those ideas you have?
Yeah, it's definitely intrigued me for sure. I think definitely the mentorship part, whether that's being a vet,
Hmm.
never playing again, but just being a vet on the team, or
Yeah.
I think just many of those types of things, whether that's group building, whether that's consulting, those types of things definitely come to mind. But again, God lays out my plan, so I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think being a coach or definitely intrigues me as well. It's extremely difficult to coach, by the way. Um, but again, I think I'm up for the challenge. But again, wherever God leads my life, I'll go.
I love that. Well, David, it's been an honor having you back on the show, man. I cannot wait to see what God's got in store for you, man. Of
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
course, you're always welcome on, man. God bless.